Now, of course, Jesus later would come and he would be the Messiah, the Messiah, and later on as Revelation unfolds, he's not only a quasi-divine, as Jews perhaps thought, but he is none other than God himself, as clearly the first chapter of Hebrews also shows. But this is something that we get as progressive revelation unfolds, not immediately. You have to be careful of reading 1 John 1 through verses 18 into the story of John, because John addresses the readers immediately, but then we unfold the story as we go along. Thus, when you read verse 2 of Hebrews in the way that in here kleronomos is used, he inherits something based on an appointment. Notice 2:8, it says, ask of me and I will give you the nations for your, what? Inheritance, and the end of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them to pieces like a potter. So immediately you have two things in the psalm that really is key to Hebrews 1. You have the adoptive heir being used of David as an enthronement psalm, and Jesus being called a son in an enthronement psalm. But notice, we're going to notice in a second, that this is also used when Jesus rises from the dead. Does he become appointed Son of God? Well, I thought he was a Son of God to begin with. But it depends what you mean. Not in the way this is being used. The way this is being used is he is appointed. That means he doesn't have it on his own. We're not talking about the God man. We're talking about the man God. The side of Jesus that has to live and has to live obediently and has to suffer in order to be able to, watch number 3 and 4, he says, who being the brightness of his glory, representing God himself, and the express image of his person, and beholding all things by the word of his power, when he had himself purged our sins, sat down at the majesty, at the right hand of God, majesty on high. Being made much better than the angel, he has inherited actually, that's in the perfect, meaning he has done it when he purged our sins, and he continues to do it. It has ongoing ramifications in the tense. He has done it and continues to hold that position. But notice that the inheritance, as you read on in Hebrews, from the rest of the verses, is based on something he does. It isn't by nature. It isn't because he's God. It's because he lived up to the status of the only one able to pull off what no other king in Israel could do. 2 Samuel 7:14 talks about the Davidic covenant. But no other king could pull off what God wanted them to pull off, which was to be what? Mature and perfect. And to be totally obedient to him. So that they can rule over his people. There was only one king that was able to do that. That's Jesus Christ. By default, inheritance in the beginning chapters of Hebrews 1:2 and 1:4 sets you up that this inheritance is nothing that is a gift. This inheritance is something that he only receives upon his finished work of purging our sins. And when you look at Psalms 2, the way it's used here, and we're going to see in the New Testament in Acts 13, and even in Acts 2, it occurred at his resurrection. Which rings a bell in light of reigning. You notice that in Psalms 2:9 talks about dashing the nations with a rod. It talks about reigning. Son of God and inheriting what he did was based on his obedience to persevere in righteousness and hating iniquity, but is unto what? Ruling. And the psalm, one piece of exegesis we need to keep in mind when we read part of a Hebrew verse used in the New Testament, in exegesis, in Jewish exegesis, called for the person to bring up the context of the Hebrew passage that he was quoting. So a writer in the New Testament need not quote the entire passage. for various reasons. Number one, it was understood part of Jewish exegesis that when you will quote a verse, you automatically import the context into what that verse was referring to. And if you import the context of Psalm 2 into Hebrews 1, it's clearly that the inheritance, number one, is something that he had to earn because he was appointed. He didn't have it by nature. And number two, it was unto rule. And the only one that was able to ultimately fulfill that was not David. Though this was spoken to David, it had in mind also Messiah. And that's why. But he only was able to do it after his resurrection. Because he was in the business of first purging our sins while he was alive. And when he went to the cross. That's why he didn't reign. That's why he was not yet the king set on the throne. That awaited Israel's response that everybody here knows they failed. But notice, interestingly, chapter 28 in verse 18 in Matthew, and Jesus came and spoke to them saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and earth. Notice that he didn't have it. It was given to him. And it was only after the resurrection that he had gotten this authority, which he was now sending the disciples to exercise. This is the authority that only Jesus had after purging our sins and earning the right and the name. By the way, everybody here knows that earning a name is earning a what? A reputation. It was only after he lived among us and he showed himself a valid king and captain that he is now able to earn, not a gift, the authority by which he will now rule. And that's why in Matthew 28:18, after his resurrection, he is now able to say, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. He didn't have it. We're not talking about him as God. Keep that in mind. 2:24 says, whom God raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be held by it. 2:32 in Peter's famous words. This Jesus God has raised up, of which are all witnesses. Notice the resurrection motif here and the purging of our sins, but the connection of the two. 2:36, therefore let all the house of Israel know assuredly that God has made. It says what it says in the Greek, English, Spanish, whatever Bible you want to read, that's what it says. He made them. He made them. He wasn't. We're talking about not the deity of Christ. The God, the man God who earned the right to rule the rest of humans as part of his nature too. Perfect man, second Adam. God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, what did he make of? Lord and Christ. I don't think the word Lord here has the idea of he made him God. He made him ruler. He made him the Christ because he earned the right, and we're going to see it in Hebrews. Notice again the motif. And we declare to you glad tidings, good news, gospel, the promise which was made to the fathers, the Jews. God has fulfilled this for us, their children, in that he has raised up Jesus. Notice the resurrection motif again. As it is also written in the second Psalm. Here it is. You are my son, today I have begotten you. Son is used twofold. Is used in the enthronement psalm as the adoptive heir of God on his behalf on earth. And it is used as an enthronement of power in resurrection. The motif is there. The motif is here. And he has raised him from the dead, no more to return the corruption. He has spoken thus, I will give you the sure mercies of David. See the David motif? the reigning motif with David. Therefore, he also says in another psalm, you want to allow your Holy One to see corruption. See again, my son have I begotten you. The resurrection motif. And then he connects it again with David. We don't need to read the rest. Notice in 5 on, all the way skipping, all the way to 14, those who will inherit salvation.